Good day, class. So, at this point, we will continue discussing our lesson about Mendelian genetics. So, in our lesson, for now, we will be focusing on different types of genetic crosses in which we will specifically discuss monohybrid cross. So, before we continue discussing monohybrid cross, let's have a review first of the things that we discussed last meeting. So basically, we discussed about genetic terminologies, right? Such as the definition and description of alleles, genes. We also define and describe dominant gene. We have recessive gene, homozygous, and heterozygous gene, as well as phenotype and genotype. And we had a part in our discussion last meeting in which we discussed about Gregor Mendel, which was known as the father of modern genetics. So, in our review class, I have here some questions that will enable you to remember the descriptions or definition of the genetic terms that we discussed, specifically genotype, phenotype, homozygous, heterozygous, dominant, and recessive. So, now let's start. So, in watermelon, round fruit shape is dominant over oblong fruit. So, now in our problem here, class, it is already stated that round fruit is dominant. So, this is our dominant trait. And uh, oblong fruit, oblong, is the recessive trait. So, that is our recessive trait. So now the first question is, what letter would you choose to represent the round and the oblong alleles? So for this specific problem, we will be using letter O. So we have here capital O and the other one is small letter o. So please take note of their distinction. So parang may maliit na buhok yung small letter O natin. So for the round, as stated with the problem, so the dominant trait is round fruit. So we will assign here for round the capital O. Okay? And for the oblong, since it is the recessive trait, we will assign here the small letter O. Okay? So that's the answer for that one. Because as we had discussed last meeting, dominant trait is represented using capital letter and recessive trait is represented using small letter. Okay? Now, let's continue. Okay. So, in what we are still dealing with the same question about the watermelon. So, let me just write here the answers that we had on the previous slide. So, for capital O, we have here round. And for the small letter O, we have here the oblong. So, we have here oblong. So now, let's answer the following question. So determine the genotypes of the following. Now, take note, class, that when we are dealing with genotypes, genotypes are represented by two letters. So now, let's start. Homozygous dominant. Again, when we say homozygous, it means that it is a genotype which is composed of two same allele. So capital, capital, or small letter, small letter. However, when we are dealing with heterozygous, it's a genotype which is composed of two different alleles. So it could be one capital letter and one small letter. So now let's start with homozygous dominant. So homozygous dominant, take note that our dominant trait is round. So homozygous dominant is represented by capital O and another capital O. Okay. Now, how about the homozygous round? So we are still dealing with homozygous and now we are, the phenotype given is round. So take note that round is the dominant. So the answer for the second one is still capital O and capital O. Next, third one, heterozygous round. So again, when we say heterozygous, one capital and one small letter. So capital O and small letter O. Next, oblong. So take a look. Oblong is our recessive trait. So it will be small letter O and small letter O. So that will be oblong. And for the homozygous recessive, so homozygous means, and homozygous and then recessive, so two small letters. So small o and small letter o. Okay? So those are the answer for the questions that we had for the second slide. Now let's continue. Third slide. So again, let's write down here the answers that we had from the previous slides. So capital O is our round, and small letter O is our oblong. So now at this point, the question asks you to identify the phenotypes of the following genotypes. So we have here given phenotypes, and then you need to write down the phenotypes or the physical characteristics of the genotypes given. So the first genotype that we have is capital O, capital O. So this is homozygous dominant or homozygous round. So as said a while ago, so the phenotype for this one is round. Okay, so that is the phenotype. Next, so we have here heterozygous, capital O and small o. So the phenotype of this genotype is still round. So in our previous discussion, we discussed why does it appears to be round even though it has the gene for being oblong. So obviously, it appears round because it has the dominant trait. And the dominant trait will always be expressed. Okay, and the recessive trait will be masked out or it will be hidden. Now, last one. So we have here small o, small o. So we have here small o. So this one, the phenotype for this one is oblong. Okay, so much for that. Now let's continue with our next topic, which is the part in which we will try to solve for the percentages. We will now deal with monohybrid crosses. Yan. So we have different types of genetic crosses. So the first type of genetic cross that we have is what we called as a monohybrid cross. Yan. So we have a monohybrid cross. So what is a monohybrid cross? So as you can see here, class, monohybrid cross is a cross involving a single trait. So ayan, ang keyword natin dito, class, is single trait. Whenever we are dealing with monohybrid cross, we are just dealing with one trait. Okay, isang trait lang yan. So example, we are just dealing with one trait, which is flower color. Or another example, we are just dealing with a single trait, let's say height. Okay, another example, single trait only, we are talking about of shape. So yan lang po yon. So again, monohybrid cross, we are just dealing with single trait. On the other way around, when we are talking about of dihybrid cross, a dihybrid cross, class, is a genetic cross involving two different traits at the same time. So example, so in this example, we are dealing flower color. This is one trait. Flower color is one trait. And plant height is another trait. So this is the first trait, one, and then the second trait is plant height. So we are dealing with two traits at a time. Okay, so that's the main difference. So monohybrid cross, single trait only, and for dihybrid cross, we are dealing two traits at a time. So for the succeeding part, we will be dealing or we will be focusing on monohybrid cross. Okay, so now let's try to answer some monohybrid cross problem. So solving monohybrid cross. So I have here example number 1. So a pure breeding purple flowered pea plant is crossed with another pure breeding white flowered pea plant. Provided that the gene for having purple flower is dominant over the gene for having white flower, determine the possible phenotype and genotype of the resulting offspring. So this is an example of a monohybrid cross because in this problem, we are just dealing with we are just dealing with flower color. Ayan, flower color lang po ang pinag-uusapan natin dito. Now, take note, class, that in solving monohybrid cross problem, there are 7 steps that we need to follow. Okay, so there are 7 steps. Now, before we continue with 7 steps, let's try to identify some clue on the problem first. So let's identify the given or the given clues on the problem. So we have here pure breeding. So the term is pure breeding. Take note, class, that when we are talking about of pure breeding, it means that pure breeding means that it is homozygous. Ayan, so take note. So when we say pure breeding, it's homozygous. So a pure breeding purple flowered pea plant is crossed with another pure breeding white flowered pea plant, provided that the gene for having purple flower is dominant. So let's highlight that. That's an important information. So purple flower is dominant. Ayan. So the dominant trait is purple and white flower. So white flower here, class, is our recessive trait. So being white flower is the recessive trait. Yan. So that's the recessive trait. Now, determine the possible phenotypes and genotypes of the resulting offspring. So now let's start discussing the steps. So step number 1. So for step number 1, class, we will assign letter. We will assign letter legend. Ayan. So we will assign letter legend. So we will choose one letter that will represent purple and white. So for this particular problem, in step 1, we will be assigning letter P. So capital P, and ayan, so this is our capital P, and we have here a small letter p. So take note of their distinction. So this is capital P, this one is our capital P, and this one is our small letter p. Okay? Now, let's assign their phenotype. So as stated here at this part, purple flower is dominant. So we will assign the capital P to the purple flower. So this one is purple. And this one, white flower, is the recessive trait. So we will assign the small letter with the recessive trait, which is white. Okay, so that is step number 1. We will just assign letter legend. Okay? Ayan. Next, let's continue. So, for step number 2, determine the genotypes of the parent. So we will now determine the genotypes of the parent based from the problem that we have. So going back to the problem, it's stated here that a pure breeding purple flowered pea plant. So this is our parent number 1. Let's write down here parent number 1. So we have parent number 1, and then let's have here parent number 2. Parent number 2. Okay. So parent number 1, ito po siya. Let's highlight it, or let's mark it with color white. Rather, let's use purple. Pure breeding, pure breeding purple flowered pea plant. Ayan, pure breeding purple flowered pea plant is our parent number 1. So pure breeding means homozygous and it's purple. So the genotype of parent number 1 is capital P and capital P. Okay, so we have capital P, capital P. Why capital P, capital P? Pure breeding, homozygous, and the phenotype is purple. So capital P, capital P. Now, let's identify the genotype of parent number 2 is crossed with another pure breeding white flowered pea plant. So let's mark it with color white. So pure breeding white flowered pea plant. So this is our parent number 2. So again, it's pure breeding, meaning it is still homozygous, but this time it is color white. And take note that white is our recessive trait. So we will write it as small letter p and small letter p. So that is step number 2. So now we have the genotype of parent number 1, capital P, and parent number 2 is small p and small p. Okay? Now let's continue with step number 3. So in step number 3, actually step number 3 and 4, plot and cross in a Punnett square. Ayan. So that is step number 3. So we will now be using Punnett square. We will plot and cross the genotypes of the parents in our Punnett square. So how do a Punnett square looks like? So ito po yung tinatawag nating Punnett square class. So this is our Punnett square. Ayan. So this is our Punnett square class. So you will write down here the genotype of parent number 1 and you will write down here the genotype of parent number 2. So going back in step number 2, 'di ba? We have seen that parent number 1, the genotype of parent number 1 is capital P, and parent number 2, we have small p and small p. Yan. So we have small p. So all we need to do for steps 3 and 4 is to write down the genotype of parent number 1 and parent number 2 into our Punnett square, and we need to cross it afterwards. So let's write down the genotypes of parent number 1. So as you can, you will write down it here. Ayan. So you will write it down there. So you will write down here capital P and then capital P. Okay? So, we're done with parent number 1. And then next, we will go on with parent number 2. So, parent number 2 is this. We will write down the genotypes of parent number 2 here. Here. And here. So, let's write down here small letter p and small letter p. Okay? So, that ends steps number 3. Now, let's proceed with step number 4, which is cross. So, how are we going to cross it? So, just like in multiplication table, we will cross this one. Yan. Cross this one. And then next, we will cross this one. And then next, we will cross this one. Okay. And then lastly, we will cross this one. Okay. So, now, let's do the crossing. So, we have here capital P, this one. So, we have here capital P and small letter p. So, we will write down here the answer in this box. So, we have capital P and small letter p. Okay, so we have capital P and small letter p. So, take note class that in crossing, always write first the capital letter. Okay, always write first the capital letter. So, now, here, okay, let's cross this one. So, we have capital P and we have small letter p. So, if we will cross it, the answer will be capital P and small letter p. Capital P, small letter p. And then next, we will cross this one, capital P, with this small letter p. So, let's cross it. So, capital P and then small letter p. And last, this one, capital P with this small letter p. So, we will write down the answer here. So, we have capital P and small letter p. So, that ends step number 4. So, we are done with step number 3, which is plotting and crossing in our Punnett square. Now, let's continue with step number 5. So, step number 5, in step number 5, we will write the phenotype. So, we will write the phenotype of the resulting offspring. Yan. So, we will write down the phenotype of the resulting offspring. So, in the space, in the boxes here, so dito, we will write down the phenotype of the resulting offspring based from the genotype that we had. So, let's start. So, for this one, ayan, so we have capital P, small letter p. So, what's the phenotype? The phenotype for this one is purple. So, this one is purple. Diba? Kasi sabi natin kanina, capital P is the dominant trait which is for purple, and small letter p is the recessive trait which is for color white. Ayan. So, idagdag natin yung info na yan dyan. So, next, here, let's identify the phenotype of this offspring. So we have capital P, small letter p. So still the color of this one is purple. Okay? And then next, this one, let's identify its phenotype. So capital P, small p, this is still color purple. And last one, for this offspring, the genotype is capital P, small p. So the phenotype is still purple. So that is our step number 5. Okay? Now, let's continue with the last two steps, which are step 6 and step 7. Now, for step 6 and step 7, we need to have a copy of our Punnett square that we had done for steps number 3, 4, and 5. So let me just construct here again the Punnett square. Ayan, so let me just construct it again. So we have here parent number 1, parent number 2, capital P, small letter p, and then small letter p, capital P, small letter p, capital P, small letter p, capital P, small letter p, and then capital P, small letter p, and then their phenotypes. So this one is purple. We have here purple. Another one here, purple. And then last one is purple. Okay. Now, let's start with step number 6, which is writing down the genotypic ratio. Okay, so we will now write the genotypic ratio. So how are we going to determine the genotypic ratio? So all you need to do, class, is to write down all the possible genotypes of the offspring. So ito po yung mga possible combination of genotypes. So pwede po siyang capital P, 'di ba? Pwede siyang capital P, small letter p, and pwede siyang small letter p and small letter p. So these are the possible genotype. So ang gagawin lang natin, we just need to look to our Punnett square regarding the genotypes of the resulting offspring. So titignan natin, meron ba kayong nakikitang capital P, capital P? Ito, capital P dito. The answer is no. So, none. So, ang sagot dito ay 0. Okay? Kasi wala namang capital P, capital P. How about this one? Small p and small p. May nakikita ba kayong small p and small p sa mga offspring? So, the answer is none again. So, you will write down here 0. So, 0 pa rin yung sagot dyan. How about heterozygous? Capital P and small p. Eto, may nakikita ba kayong capital P, small p dito? Obviously, meron. And ilan siya? Bilangin natin. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, the answer is 4. You write down there 4. So, ano ang ating genotypic ratio? So, ang genotypic ratio natin, class, is 4 is to 0 is to 0. So, this is our final answer. Let me just highlight it. Ayan. So, eto ngayon yung ating genotypic ratio. 4 is to 0 is to 0. Ayan. So, that is the genotypic ratio. And last, for step number 7, we will now go on with the phenotypic ratio. Okay? So, let's determine the phenotypic ratio. So, paano natin gagawin yon? Let's write down the possible phenotypes. So, dun sa problem natin, dalawang kulay lang, di ba, ang pinag-uusapan. So, we have purple and we have white. Ayan. So, we have purple and white. Now, we need to look with our Punnett square and look for the number of offspring that are purple and offspring that are white. So, let's start with purple. Ayan. Dito, sa ating Punnett square, ilan yung purple natin? So, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So, we have 4 purple. So, you will write down here 4. Okay? Now, let's continue with white. Tingin ulit tayo dito sa Punnett square. How many of the offspring are white? Obviously, the answer is none. So, walang white na lumabas. So, the answer here is 0. So, what is the phenotypic ratio now? The phenotypic ratio is 4 is to 0. So, that is our phenotypic ratio. Ayan. So, phenotypic ratio is 4:0. Okay? Ayan. Let's continue. So, that's how we answer monohybrid cross. So, we will use steps number 1 to 7. Okay? Now, let's continue with another example. So, for example number 2, the gene for purple flower color is dominant over white flower color. 2 heterozygous purple flowered pea plant was crossed. Determine the possible phenotypic and genotypic descriptions of the resulting offspring. Again, this is still monohybrid cross because we are just dealing with single characteristic, which is flower color. So let's look for the clue in the problem. So the gene for purple flower color is dominant. Yan. So purple flower color is dominant. So meaning white flower color is our recessive trait. Okay? So another clue is this. So two heterozygous purple flower pea plant was crossed. So these are the parents. So dalawang heterozygous. Ayan. So now we are done identifying the clue with the problem. So now let's start with step number 1. So step number 1, we will again assign a letter legend. So in this particular problem, we will still use letters P, capital P. Ayan, so capital P, and let's use small letter p. So sila pa rin. So again, capital P will be assigned for the dominant trait and small letter p will be assigned for the recessive trait. So purple flower color is dominant. So meaning capital P here class, our capital P here class will represent purple. So we have here purple. And our small letter p here class represents the recessive trait, which is white flower. So let's write down here white. Okay, so we're done with step number 1. Next, let's proceed with step number 2. So in step number 2, we will determine the genotypes of the parent. So parent number 1. Okay, so parent number 1 and then parent number 2. So let's identify. So for parent number 1, let's go back with the problem. So ito po siya. So 2 heterozygous. So dalawang heterozygous purple flowered pea plant are the parents. So heterozygous means 1 capital and 1 small letter. So this is the genotype of parent number 1 and this is the genotype of parent number 2. So the same, heterozygous. Okay? So we're done with steps number 1 and steps number 2. Now let's proceed with steps number 3, 4, and 5. Yan. So steps 3, 4, and 5. So for steps 3, 4, and 5, we will be now using our Punnett square. Plot, plot, cross, and then write the phenotypes of the resulting offspring. So let me just construct here our Punnett square. Yan. So this is our Punnett square. So parent number 1 and then parent number 2. So let's just write down here the genotype of parent number 1, heterozygous, capital P, small p. And then parent number 2, capital P and small letter p. And then another information that is pertinent here is that capital P is for purple and small letter p is for white. Okay, now let's do step number 3. Let's plot. So parent number 1, so this is the genotype of parent number 1. We just need to write it down here, dito. So let's have here capital P and small letter p. Okay, and then genotype of parent number 2, this one, capital P, small p also. We will write it down here. So let's do it. So capital P and then small letter p. And then after that, we will now plot and cross. So eto muna tayo. Capital P, capital P. So let's write down here the answer. Capital P, capital P. Next, this one. Ito naman yung isulat natin. So we have here capital P and small letter p. And then next, this one. Ito naman yung i-cross natin. We have here capital P and small letter P. And last, ito naman, yung i-cross natin. So we have 2 small letter P, and then small letter P. So we are done with step number 4. Now let's continue with step number 5. Let's write down the phenotype of the resulting offspring. So this one, capital P, the phenotype of this is purple. Yan. So this one is purple. So this one, the phenotype, so we have here heterozygous. So the phenotype is still purple. So this is still purple because it has the dominant gene. Again, the dominant gene will be the one expressed and the recessive gene will be hidden. So same with this one. So parehas lang naman itong dalawang to. So ang phenotype nito is also purple. And then last, this one. So we have here small letter P, small letter P. Ito yan, small letter P, small letter P. So the phenotype of this one is white. Okay? So we are done with the steps 3, 4, and 5. Now let's continue with step 6 and 7. Yan. So let me just construct here again our Punnett square that we had in the previous slide. Wait lang ha, gawin natin yung Punnett square. Ayan. So, parent 1, parent number 2, capital P, and then small letter P, capital P, small letter P, and then capital P, capital P, capital P, small letter P, capital P, small letter P, small letter P, small letter P. So, this is purple, 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 and then we have here white. Ayan. So now, let's proceed with step number 6. So for our step number 6, we will determine the genotypic ratio. Ayan. So let's have the genotypic ratio. So the genotypic ratio, write down all the possible genotypes. So capital P, heterozygous, capital P, small letter P, and then last one is small p and small letter p. So now let's look with the result of our Punnett square. So capital P, ilan ang capital P dito sa ating Punnett square? Ito siya, merong isa. So isusulat natin dito ay 1. Okay? And then next, this one. Capital P, small letter P, heterozygous. Balik tayo dito sa Punnett square. Ilan? So, dalawa. Ito, 1 and 2. Ayan. So, dalawa sila. So, lagay natin dito ay 2. And then last, small letter P and small letter P. Balik tayo dito. Ito siya. Small p and small letter P. Write down here, ilan? So, we have 1. So, ano ngayon ang kanyang genotypic ratio? So, magsisimula tayo dun sa lowest number. So, dito, ang lowest number natin ay, dito, ang lowest number natin ay 1 and 1. Tapos, to be followed by 2. So, isulat natin dito is 1 is to 1 is to 2. Ayan. So, yan ngayon yung kanyang genotypic ratio. 1 is to 1 is to 2. Yun yung sagot. Okay? And last, step number 7. Step number 7, we will now determine the phenotypic ratio. So the phenotypic ratio, so in order to get the phenotypic ratio, write down the possible phenotype. So there are 2 colors involved. So we have purple and we have white. So we have purple and white. Now let's go back with our Punnett square. How many offsprings are purple? So balikan natin. 1, 2, 3. So the answer here, class, is 3. You write down here 3. And then how many are white? So only this one. So there is only one white. So 1. So again, we will start with the lowest number, which is 1. To be followed by number 3. So the answer is 1 is to 3. So this is our phenotypic ratio. So that is the phenotypic ratio for example number 2. Okay? Now, let's continue with example number 3. So, example number 3, the gene for purple flower color is dominant over white flower color. A heterozygous purple flowered pea plant was crossed with a white pea plant. Determine the phenotypes and genotypes of the resulting offspring. So, let's look first for some clues on the problem. So, the gene for purple flower color is dominant. So, purple flower color is still dominant over white. So, white flower color is our recessive. Now, let's look for the genotypes of the parent or clue about the genotypes of the parent. So, heterozygous purple is crossed with a white pea plant. Ayan. So, those are the clues that are present in the problem. Now, let's do our steps number 1 to 7. So, step number 1, we will assign letter legend. So, for step number 1, we will still use capital P, or maybe we could use different color. Let's use different letters. Okay, gamit tayo ng ibang letter kasi kanina pa tayo gumagamit ng P. So, let's use, any letters will do. As long as tama yung representation nyo ni dominant at ni recessive. So, now, in this particular problem, let's use letter B. Boy, as in boy. So, let's have capital B. And then, small letter B. Okay, so we have capital B and small letter B. Now, purple flower is dominant. So, nakalagay na, purple flower is dominant. So, the capital letter B here is it represents purple. And then, small letter B here represents color white. Okay, so that is step number 1. Next, let's proceed with step number 2. So, for our step number 2, we will determine the genotype of parent number 1 and then parent number 2. So, for parent number 1, heterozygous purple flowered pea plant. So, heterozygous means one capital and one small letter. So, let's write down here. Capital B and then small letter B. Okay? And then, cross with a white pea plant. So, ito siya, white pea plant. So, ang white natin ay recessive. So, the genotype of parent number 2 the genotype of parent number 2 is small letter B and small letter B. So, that is our step 1 and step number 2. Now, let's continue with our step number 3, 4, and 5. So, steps 3, 4, 5. So, we will now use the Punnett square. But then, let's write down here first the genotypes of parent number 1. And then, parent number 2. So, yung parent number 1 natin is heterozygous, capital B, small letter B, and then color white, small b, as well as the legend that we use. So, capital B is for purple, and then small letter B is for white. Okay? So, now let's construct here our Punnett square. Yan. So, let's have here our Punnett square. Okay. So, parent number 1 and then parent number 2. So, parent number 1, so this is the genotype. We will write it down here. So, capital B and small letter B. And then for parent number 2, eto. So, we will write it down here. So, we have small letter B and small letter B. Now, let's do step number 4. We will cross it. So, this one, capital B, small b. So, ito po siya. Capital B, small b. Next is this one. Okay, so we have capital B and small b. Next is this one. Okay, so we have here small b and small b. And last is this one. So we have here small letter b and small letter b. So we're done with step number 4. Now let's proceed with step number 5. So let's write down the phenotype of the resulting offspring. So this one, Capital B, small b. So this is color purple. So as with this. So this is also purple. And this one is small b, small letter b. This is color white. And so we have here white. Okay. So now let's proceed with steps number 6 and 7. Let's write down here again the Punnett square that we had from the previous slide. Okay, sulat lang natin siya ng mabilis. Ayan. Wait lang ha. So, parent 1, parent number 2, capital B, small b, small b, small b, capital B, small b, capital B, small b, small b, and small b, small b, small b. This is purple. This is purple. And this is white. And this is white. So, let's start with step number 6. So, step number 6, we are looking for the genotypic ratio. So, let's look for the genotypic ratio. So, all possible genotypes are capital B, capital B, capital B, small letter b, and small b, small b. Yan. So, let's take a look with our Punnett square. So, capital B, ilan ang capital B dito? The answer is none. So, 0. Next, this one. Heterozygous, capital B, small b, dalawa. 1 and 2. So, we have here 2. And the next, small b, ilan ang small b dito? Ito yon, small b and small b. So, we also have here 2. So, our genotypic ratio is, we can disregard 0, no? So, the answer is 2 is to 2. Pwedeng ganyan na or pwedeng idagdag nyo rin yung 0. 2 is to 2 is to 0. So, that is our genotypic ratio. Okay? So, this is our genotypic ratio. And then last, step number 7 for the phenotypic ratio. Yan. So, for our phenotypic ratio, let's write down the possible phenotypes, which are purple and white. Purple and white. So, how many are purple and how many are white on the result of our Punnett square? So, purple, 1, 2. So, you write down here 2. And then, how many are white? So, white and white. So, we also have here 2. So, our phenotypic ratio is 2 is to 2. Ayan. So, ayan po yung ating phenotypic ratio. So, we are now done. Okay? So, at this point, meron po tayong meron tayong activity. Meron kayong activity na sasagutan na ganito. Dalawang problem lang yon, naka-lay down na doon yung steps number 1 to 7. Kailangan nyo na lang siyang lagyan ng sagot. Okay? So, that ends our discussion about monohybrid cross. So, thank you guys. Bye!